To make this video, I went way outside of my comfort zone. That being said, I just want to say right up front that I have no idea what I'm doing. I have a lot of experience working on suspensions and trucks and miscellaneous body things and radios and stuff like that, but this was the first time I ever tried a project that could potentially end up with my motor exploding, and that was really stressful. To prepare for this project, I watched and rewatched a ton of videos on YouTube on how to do this project. I'm gonna post links to those in the description of this video, and also a couple articles that I read and reread and checked and rechecked before and during this project. Anyway, I bought this car from my sister about a year ago, and I was told right away that it's gonna need some love. It sat for over a year. It barely started when I bought the car. It had all kinds of problems, it was dirty, lots of stuff going on. And when I got the car, I was also told that it was due for a timing belt and a water pump. Now, 2 months into owning this car, I was driving to my cousin's house for our annual Christmas party, and all of a sudden that big bright light started flashing at me. That basically means overheating. You know, this car's kind of dumb. It doesn't even have a temperature gauge. It just has a blue light when the car is cold and a red light when it's overheating. So that light started flashing at me. I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on. I've been driving for 2 minutes and I'm on the freeway and it's 50 degrees out in San Diego. That's cold for San Diego, but it's cold out. Why is this car overheating? I figured, it's not really overheating. But just to be safe, I pulled over, opened up the hood, and I hear sizzling sounds coming from where I realized later was one of the coolant temperature sensors. So after this, I closed the hood, let the car cool off for a few minutes, drove the next 2 minutes over to my cousin's house, did the party thing, and then going home from there, it was a 10-minute drive, which turned into about a 40-minute drive because the car would overheat every 100 meters or so. So I had to drive, stop, drive, stop, drive, stop. Didn't want to blow up the motor. The next day, I pulled the codes and I found out that the car was complaining about coolant temperature sensors. So I swapped those out and no dice. The car would drive a little bit further, but would still overheat. Over the next several months, I tried all kinds of different things to diagnose and fix the overheating problem. I kept avoiding the water pump and timing belt because I split time between Washington and San Diego, and when I'm in San Diego, I don't want to spend my entire time working on the car. I want to be doing San Diego things. So I was always trying to find the quick fix, but finally, after about 9 months, I decided to just bite the bullet and try. If you're considering this project, I highly recommend ecstuning.com. I'm not sponsored by these guys, but if you are watching right now and you would like to sponsor a future video, I'd be all for it. When you go onto the ECS website, there's a lot of options for the timing belt kit for these cars, and it can be kind of overwhelming. After a couple days of researching, I decided on this kit. And it includes the timing belt tensioner roller, the accessory belt, the stretch bolts for the motor mounts, the water pump, camshaft and crankshaft seals, new thermostat, timing belt dampener, thermostat O-ring, and a new thermostat housing. Quick note, I didn't end up installing the crank and the camshaft seals, mostly because I was in a bit of a rush and I didn't really want to open up a bag of worms if I didn't need to. I'd read on some places in the forums that say if you replace them when they don't need to be, it can actually cause leaking. I didn't really have enough time to fiddle with it, so I just did the other stuff and just prayed that the car will not leak for a while. And if it does leak, then I'll just have to take it apart again later. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to just say again, I have no idea what I'm doing. This was my first time doing this project. Chances are I just got lucky and the car is happy now, but just be really careful when you go through these next steps because you can potentially blow up your motor. And if you're not comfortable with that, then I would recommend having someone else do it for you. But without further ado, here's my experience swapping out the timing belt and water pump on the 1.8T turbo. Start by removing the engine cover by lifting straight up and then toward you. Release the snaps on the upper timing cover. You may need to remove the hose blocking the timing cover before you can pull the cover off. The next part confused me for a few minutes. Apparently the Beetle has these plastic lug nut covers. Use the hook provided in your spare tire and jack kit to pull off the plastic covers. Then remove the lug nuts and tire. Next, loosen the 2 hose clamps and a bolt holding the intercooler pipe inside the wheel well. Carefully remove the intercooler pipe. This will give you better access to the side splash guard. You can use a pry bar to get it going and then just pull straight down to remove the guard. There are a whole bunch of Torx screws holding in the fender liner. Remove them all and then pull the fender liner out. To release the accessory belt tensioner, there are a couple of hoses that you'll need to get out of the way. After loosening the hose clamps, I use a pry bar and a rubber mallet to gently tap the big hose off the intake manifold. I think that's the intake manifold. Again, I don't know what I'm doing, so if I'm wrong, please comment below. Anyway, push the big hose out of the way. There's also a smaller hose to remove. I don't recommend using clamp pliers like I did here. I ended up tearing it up pretty bad. Because I mangled that hose, I had to order a new hose, but it came as one big part that includes the fuel lines and a bunch of other stuff. I'll do a video on that another time. To release the accessory belt tensioner, turn the accessory belt tensioner toward the front of the car and insert a drill bit or similar sized metal rod to lock the tensioner open. You can now remove the accessory belt. To remove the tensioner, you might need to move more hoses out of the way. The tensioner is held on by 3 bolts. On the crank gear, there's a little nipple that corresponds with one of the holes on the crank pulley. I marked them both. And then remove the crank pulley and the 2 lower timing covers. I started to remove the coolant bottle by undoing the Phillips head screw and unplugging the sensor. And then I realized I should probably drain the system first. You could also use this opportunity to flush the system, but again, I was short on time and decided to do that later. To drain the system, open the coolant overflow and open the petcock on the driver's side of the radiator.
It's supposed to be pink, but it's not very concentrated.
Once the bottle is dry, remove the overflow and return lines and remove the bottle. You'll next need to mark your fuel lines. Carefully remove them from the fuel rail. Plug the lines. And bungee them out of the way. You'll also want to push the coolant return out of the way too. Here's where things get really scary. If you screw this part up, things may go boom. Using a 12-point socket, turn the crank gear clockwise till the engine is at top dead center. There are a few places that you can find top dead center. There is a mark on the cam gear that should line up with the mark on the top of the engine. There are also markings on the lower timing cover and crank pulley. I've also read that there are markings on the transmission if you have a manual transmission, but I couldn't figure out where those were. To be extra safe, I marked everything. I marked the pulley, the lower cover, the cam gear, and the upper marking. Here's a view looking down at the lower cover and the pulley from the top of the engine bay. I actually like this view a whole lot better because it was easier to see where top dead center was, because the way the car is shaped, it's kind of an awkward angle to look down and over into the engine bay to see where the markings match on the cam gear and on the top of the engine. So looking down from above seemed to be a lot easier. With everything at top dead center, I went to town marking the crap out of the belt and the gears. I did this at the cam gear and at the crank gear. This was probably overkill, but I was super paranoid. Once you've got everything marked, support the engine with a jack and remove the passenger side chassis to motor mount. There are 3 bolts securing the motor mount to the engine. The easiest one to get to is the lower bolt, and you can get to it through the tire well. The top bolt closest to the front of the car is pretty easy to get to, but you might need a magnet to get the bolt out of the pocket once it's loose. The third bolt is a little tricky. I tried to get at it from under the car first, but it's easier to get it from the top. Don't worry about removing the mount just yet. It's easier after the belt is out of the way. The timing belt tensioner is kind of a pain to get to. It takes a lot of patience and lots of slow turns of the wrench. Once the tensioner is out, taking out the old belt and the mount is easy.
Hell yeah, brother.
With the old belt out, get your new belt and copy your marks to the new belt. Double and triple check your work. You don't want to be off by a tooth. Next, remove the 3 bolts securing the water pump to the engine and gently pry off with a pry bar.
Oh well.
Be prepared for a bunch of coolant to spill out. When I removed the water pump, I was a little confused.
Wait a minute. Is that what it's supposed to look like? I don't see anything on the back of it.
It turns out that the plastic impeller broke in 2 and was still in the engine.
Wow. Completely shattered. Jeez.
Here's a look at my new water pump next to the old busted up pump. Before installing the water pump, lube the gasket with some fresh coolant and gently push the new pump into place. I used blue Loctite, threaded the bolts in by hand, and then used a torque wrench to tighten to spec. Next, I removed the tensioner pulley using an Allen socket and replaced with the new part included in the ECS kit. When reassembling, make sure to put the new bolt into the pulley first, followed by the spacer washer on the other side. Apply blue Loctite and tighten to spec. A couple quick notes before you start putting it all back together. You're gonna wanna mock up the motor mount next to the engine. Don't bolt it in just yet, but mock it up where it's supposed to go, and then pretend like this is the timing belt. You're gonna drape it over top of the cam gear, and then the motor mount kind of straddles it on the back side, so towards the back of the car. So you're gonna wanna have the motor mount ready and kind of placed that way so you can get everything situated. The second tip is that before you put the motor mount back into the engine bay, make sure that you have the upper rear bolt already in the mount, because if you try to put the bolt in while the mount is already in the car, there's not gonna be enough room to fit it. One other note on that is that ECS provides brand new bolts for these because the bolts on the engine mounts are meant to be single use only. You'll torque them to a specific spec, and then you're gonna turn it another 90 degrees, which then stretches the bolts and keeps it more secure. Not sure if this was the best way to do this, but I installed the belt tensioner next. And I don't have any video on this because it's a really tight space. You saw a little bit of it when I was taking it apart. There isn't a whole lot of room to work, and it was just a long, boring, annoying process. One important thing though, make sure to not pull the grenade pin until after the belt is in place, because if you pull the grenade pin, that will set the tension on, and it'll make it even harder to install the new belt. Here's a look at the tensioner and tensioner pulley reinstalled and the belt ready for the fun part. I don't have any video of me putting on the timing belt. This took a long time. There was a lot of cursing and swearing and a lot of frustration, a lot of sweating. I think what really threw me off was that in the different videos, they approached this part in different ways. Okay, one of the videos said that you should always keep the car at top dead center, don't let it move at all. And then watching other videos, it seemed like it was okay to kind of turn the wheel or turn the crank a little bit to get the belt to catch. It actually took me a couple days to figure it out because I would do it, get pissed off, and then walk away. Come back, try again, get pissed off, walk away. I think what worked for me, and it's all blurred now, I'm probably repressing these memories, but I started by setting the belt on the cam gear and made sure that all the marks matched. And then I threaded it over the timing belt tensioner and then over the crank gear. And then I had my other hand up on top on the water pump. And with the other hand, I just kind of jiggled the crank gear back and forth in small increments, just enough so that I could get the wheel to the gears to turn a little bit, and then I was able to slowly push the belt over the water pump. It was really hard, and the way I look at it, as long as the lines match up on the top gear and on the bottom gear, all the markings, if they all match up, then even if the cams go off top dead center, they'll go off at the same rate. So this is where I might have just gotten lucky and the car started and didn't blow up, so woohoo. But this is where it can be really hairy. You want to make sure that the belt goes on and that isn't off at all, because if it is, then that's when the motor can be unhappy and explode. All right. So once you get the belt on the car, what it says to do is you're supposed to turn it clockwise slowly for 2 full revolutions to see if there's any interference. And if there's no interference, you should be good to go. To get everything back together, it's just the reverse of the first. Reinstall the motor mounts, torque them down to spec, and then turn an additional 90 degrees to activate the stretch of the bolt. Using blue Loctite, reinstall the lower timing covers and crank pulley. To tighten the crank pulley bolts to spec, use the 12-point socket and breaker bar you use to turn the crank to keep the pulley from spinning. Reinstall the intercooler piping. Reinstall the upper timing cover. Reinstall the accessory belt tensioner. Reinstall the accessory belt. Pull the slack on the tensioner to remove the drill bit and then reset the tension on the belt. Reinstall the hoses to the intake manifold. Reinstall your coolant bottle. In this case, I put in a brand new one. Reattach your fuel lines. Close the petcock on the radiator and start refilling the system with the correct fluid. I use 50-50 pre-diluted for convenience. Now this is the part where you find out if you really F things up. I've heard horror stories of people turning on the car and then the timing being off and the engine exploded, and so I was sweating bullets as I turned the key on the car. But thankfully the car no-go boom and we're good to go. Once the car is running, you're going to want to turn on the heater at full blast to start circulating the fluid through the system and through the heater core. Keep an eye on the fluid level and keep adding fluid as needed. Watch for leaks. Like this. Turns out that the new thermostat O-ring wasn't installed correctly, and that's why I was spewing coolant. Stay tuned for another video. I'm going to do a separate video on the thermostat installation in the near future. Anywho, once we were leak free, I let the car run a little longer to burp the system and then took it for a drive. The next day I topped off the system again for good measure. I put quite a few spirited miles on the car ever since this project, and she seems to be running pretty consistently between 200 and 209 degrees, which is within the acceptable limits. I don't see any leaking and she seems to be pretty happy. As I mentioned before, I have no idea what I'm doing. So if you're a seasoned mechanic and you see something that I've kind of messed up or maybe something I could have done better, please comment below. And if you're brand new to cars and you're considering this project, please, again, don't rely 100% on this video. Look at the other videos I'm gonna post links to in the description because there's a lot more knowledge there. I'm just trying to highlight the things that worked for me and my experience with this project. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful. I really tried to highlight some of the smaller details that the other videos didn't really cover. Mostly the basic things. You know, these guys have been doing it for a long time, so they probably overlook the stuff that us mere mortals are gonna get stuck on. So I'm hopefully gonna help you on those little things. If you like this video, please hit the like button, consider subscribing, and stay tuned for more stuff. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.